Ladies and gents, welcome to this week's Geotalk Online, and thank you for joining us from wherever you are in South Africa or around the world. I can see we have several attendees from scattered around the globe. So thank you all for joining us, and good afternoon or good morning to wherever you are. Particularly good morning to our speaker today, Pia Viglietti, who's joining us all the way from Chicago, from the Field Museum of Natural History, where she's currently the Granger Bioinformatics Center postdoctoral fellow. But of course, she's also a graduate of Wits University, a Witsi, and a graduate from UCT. And as you'll see in her talk this evening, her research interests are vertebrate paleontology, stratigraphy, and geochronology. And she's really using a truly multidisciplinary range of techniques to improve our understanding of the evolution of mammals, crocodiles, and dinosaurs across the Permo-Triassic and the end-Triassic mass extinctions. And of course, tonight she's going to be talking about a paper that was recently published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, a very prestigious journal. And Pia, thank you so much for offering to give this talk. And thank you everyone for joining us in the audience. So Pia, I'm going to hand over to you. But before I do, I just want to thank John Hancock's and CCIC for sponsoring these Geotalks. Over to you, Pia.
Great. Thanks, Grant. And thank you for inviting me to give this talk today. So let me get sharing. It is saying I cannot share the screen now for some reason. Yeah.
I know why, Pia. Let me just stop my sharing.
Right, of course. Okay.
My fault, not your fault. Okay, go for it.
All good. Okay. Let's get this slideshow on the road. All right. Well, hello and good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are. And thank you for coming to my talk. I appreciate you being here. And as Grant said, I will be presenting the results of a collaborative investigation published in PNAS just last month. And in the paper, we provide new information on the dynamics of the end-Permian mass extinction event on land as preserved in South Africa's Karoo Basin. And we also made the cover of that issue of PNAS last month. So really proud of all our collaborators involved in the study. But before I go into the paper, I just wanted to begin by providing a brief overview of mass extinctions and the place that the end-Permian mass extinction event falls within that context. And I'm sure many of you know, having a good understanding of the geologic timescale, there have been 5 mass extinction events in the last 500 million years. And the most recent is the most well-known by people, the end Cretaceous extinction event, which killed off non-avian dinosaurs at the end of the Cretaceous. So in each of these extinctions, you will see there were victims. These were the ecosystem incumbents prior to the mass extinction event. And you'll see there were specific triggers for each of these extinctions. And you can see that they are quite different from one another, even though they created similar catastrophes for the dominant life forms at that time. However, their magnitude did vary, and this is why I have the end Cretaceous and the end Permian in red, as they were the largest of these mass extinction events. But the end Permian takes top spot, being often referred to as the mother of all mass extinction events, based on total species losses, which is estimated to be about 90% of marine species and 70% of land species at the time. So a really big mass extinction. And for understanding the environmental changes at the end of the Permian on land, that mostly comes from South Africa's Karoo Basin. And here we have an uninterrupted record of what life was like during the Permian and Triassic periods. This puts the South African record in a unique position to evaluate hypotheses related to ecosystem changes across the Permo-Triassic boundary on land. And just to place this extinction event in the context of the Karoo Basin and its lithostratigraphy, this extinction event is preserved within the Balfour and Katberg formations of the Beaufort Group. And I've shown it here with the red age constraint of 252 million years. That's sort of about when it occurred in time. And this rich fossil record of the Beaufort group, mainly famed for its ancient mammal relative fossils, known as therapsids, also allowed workers in the country to erect a vertebrate assemblage zone scheme to the Karoo Beaufort group, which was first introduced over 100 years ago, and further refinements have continued. And recently in a publication in a South African Journal of Geology last year, where many revisions by Karoo workers was published. And this is just a diagram from Smith et al. Showing these revisions. Yeah, what I've also shown here is the placement of the traditional Permo-Triassic boundary in the Karoo, which lies at the boundary of the Daptocephalus and Lystrosaurus declivis assemblage zones in the Upper Balfour Formation's Pilenkloef member. And we can't talk about the Permo-Triassic boundary without mentioning this site. This is Batuli Canyon. I took this photograph when I first visited this site in 2010, a long time ago. And this area is located in the Southern Free State province of South Africa. And this is where the Permo-Triassic boundary was actually first discovered by Roger Smith, my PhD advisor, and Jennifer Botha, after James Kitching showed the site to Roger, citing that in the valley he found Dicynodon, which is a Permian dicynodont, and in the hills he found Lystrosaurus, which at that time was regarded as a purely Triassic species. So for a long time, it was thought that the Permo-Triassic boundary was actually not preserved in the Karoo, that it was an erosional unconformity. So this was an important discovery for Permo-Triassic boundary research. And so much of our understanding of the end-Permian mass extinction event in the Karoo comes from the research conducted by Roger Smith, Jennifer Botha, and collecting teams from Aziko and the National Museum. And the stratigraphic range chart that I show here basically shows the main extinction that they identified between the Daptocephalus and Lystrosaurus zones, which marks the traditional Permo-Triassic boundary, which is I've shown as a red star on their section. The three extinction phases that they also show here and associated climatic changes, suggesting increasing aridification and a post-extinction rapid recovery are also identified. And I've also added a yellow star because in this study by Botha et al., they also presented dates supporting their traditional placement of the boundary, but it's just an error margin of where we could also have a possible Permo-Triassic boundary placement. But this paradigm has been challenged by other workers, such as Gastaldo and their working group. And they question the timing of the Karoo extinctions with the marine portion of the event, based on last appearances of specific Permian and Triassic species, and also the placement of the Permo-Triassic boundary based on a date that they also retrieved. So their Permo-Triassic boundary lies in the lower portion of the Katberg Formation, so within the Lystrosaurus declivis zone, and is shown by a blue star on the same section. So this means there are actually potentially three competing Permo-Triassic boundary hypotheses. They're not hugely distant in like stratigraphic time, but however, I will refer to these as the Gastaldo traditional and Botha Permo-Triassic boundary hypotheses, using the same colored stars to refer to them as I go along. But this debate has been continuing for a while, and while it was going on, I was finishing my PhD at Wits, where I was basically revising the stratigraphy of the last Permian assemblage zone, the then Dicynodon assemblage zone. And during this research, I basically revived James Kitching's original Daptocephalus zone, which is what it is called now. And I also instated two subzones representing a lower and an upper subzone to reconcile revised distributions of index species, in particular Dicynodon, Cynognathus, Lystrosaurus, McKayi, which is a Permian Lystrosaurus species, and Muscarinus. And these biostratigraphic revisions, when combined with results I gathered from the lithostratigraphy, showed that the Permo-Triassic boundary record actually represented an expanded record in the southern part of the basin and a more compressed record in the northern part of the basin. So this made me start to think about the time scale of the extinction interval in the Karoo and whether it was occurring over a longer period of time than traditionally identified. But we needed to quantify this. So this was where my postdoc came in, and I left sunny South Africa for chilly Chicago, and using the Karoo fossil tetrapod dataset I'd compiled with Roger and Jennifer, I began collaborations with Ken Angelzik, who's the curator of paleomammalogy at the Field Museum, and also Roger Benson, who's based at Oxford University. And we aim to look at the diversity dynamics of the Karoo end-Permian mass extinction event. So the paradigm for some time has been to use the marine portion of this extinction event as a touchstone for timing the end-Permian mass extinction event on land, which up until recently and even currently is actually still far less understood. The marine record is more complete. They have better dating. They've been able to constrain the extinction better. So I mean, that kind of makes sense. But what it has meant is that many studies have struggled to time the land event with the marine extinction, concluding even that in some places like the Karoo Basin, land extinctions may not even be related to the end-Permian extinction event, nor significant in scale based on last appearances of Permian species in inverted commas. However, our study has been the first to try and quantify the dynamics of the extinction event on land from the perspective of the Karoo Basin. And the data included hundreds of fossils collected and prepared by team members and co-authors from Aziko Museum in Cape Town and the National Museum in Bloemfontein. So their collecting and fossil preparation over the years really helped make this investigation possible. So all this work, over decades, culminated in being able to group a total of 588 tetrapod fossils, representing 52 Permo-Triassic species into 13 stratigraphic intervals, which we referred to as bins for our study. And our collaborator, Roger Benson, then applied shareholder quorum subsampling, SQS for short, which is basically a coverage-based rarefaction to the bins. And this was done to quantify diversity metrics in species, such as species origination, extinction and turnover, and diversification. Abundance of specific species like the Therapsid Lystrosaurus and overall species evenness in the bins was also quantified. And based on absolute ages of the stratigraphic succession, we estimated the study interval represents about 4 million years, with each bin representing about 300,000 years. And these are our results, which track, as I said, tetrapod extinction, origination, and diversity dynamics across the Karoo Permo-Triassic boundary interval. We were also interested in relative abundance of the disaster taxon Lystrosaurus, and we also subsampled species richness for all bin intervals. You'll see in the bottom part of the figure, global correlations were also done with reference to the 3 Permo-Triassic boundary hypotheses. Now, I know there's a lot of information here, so I'm going to zoom in on specific sections just to explain them further. So here we are just looking at the part showing rates of extinction origination and turnover across the Karoo Permo-Triassic boundary. Firstly, you'll see that extinction in red or orange and turnover remain relatively low through our study interval, but extinction becomes significantly elevated above background in the upper Daptocephalus zone and remains high for an estimated period close to 1 million years in the lower Lystrosaurus zone. We also see a pulse of origination, which is the green line, with the main extinction peak. So high origination and extinction result in high turnover, species turnover. So this is all happening in our post-extinction recovery phase. So if you look also at the Permo-Triassic boundary hypotheses, you'll see this main extinction interval almost spans all 3 hypotheses. And I'll come back to why this is interesting. So comparisons to the to other terrestrial records around the world were also done, which included China, Russia, Australia, and Tibet. So here they have varying assemblages of either plants or vertebrate fossils. And they also suggest similar patterns of successive extinction and occurrence of transitional communities across our Permo-Triassic boundary interval, which was also a really interesting finding. So species richness was a little more of a complicated result because although it remains sort of somewhat low in the piling kloof member, it does fluctuate, although we do see a fair amount of error associated with that. So, we think this is due to the fact that we begin to see new species appear in the lower Lystrosaurus zone. So high richness is obtained as a result. But our findings tentatively suggest that these fluctuations in richness during the early Triassic may be associated with primary productivity and to us possibly unstable ecosystem dynamics. So to us, these data do not demonstrate communities were quickly recovering. Another interesting result relates to the therapsid Lystrosaurus. High Lystrosaurus abundance is well documented in the Lystrosaurus declivus zone. However, our data, the purple lines, show that Lystrosaurus achieved high relative abundance in the upper Daptocephalus zone and before the main extinctions. And this may be an underestimation, given the hesitation even from prominent fossil finders like James Kitching to Bendy's for Lystrosaurus. So now I just wanted to discuss the implications of these results for the narrative of the Karoo Permo-Triassic boundary. As I said, there's been debates about the severity of the extinction in the Karoo and the position of the Permo-Triassic boundary and its relation to the marine extinction. So I'm just gonna, briefly summarize what these results mean for that our new narrative. So firstly, we find evidence for land extinctions happening over a protracted interval. So we estimate about 1 million years. And this contrasts with the marine event, well documented to be geologically rapid, about 100,000 years total. So we introduce a sustained extinction narrative to the Karoo extinctions rather than a phased or rapid extinction suggested in previous studies. So, this also doesn't rely on precise timings of specific species as we, subsample specific bin intervals. So hundreds or tens of species have helped us come to this conclusion. Also, the protracted nature of land extinctions mean it does not completely coincide with the marine event. We also compared our data to sections from other parts of the world, as I said, that show similar transitional assemblages on land. That possibly reflect, that this may have been the dynamic of the extinction event on land globally. So we suggest that the marine extinction may rather be a punctuation to a much longer biological span of biological attrition on land. So this means that regardless of the Permo-Triassic boundary hypothesis we use, we show that paleontological data support a significant catastrophic event occurring on land in the Karoo. And timing it with the marine extinction does not mean it was not related to the global event, nor significant in scale, we believe. So as I said before, another interesting result relates to the extinctions post the child Lystrosaurus. And it's often portrayed as flourishing in the post-extinction world of the early Triassic, but we show that it became abundant before the main extinction and was likely thriving in conditions that were causing extinction in other species. So an ability to benefit from the conditions that create and sustain mass extinctions may be common among disaster taxa, and this is still something that's worth exploring in Lystrosaurus and potentially other species. What does reaffirm this theory for us is that another therapsid species called Diectodon also seems to follow a similar pattern across the end-Guadalupean extinction event, which has been well studied by Bruce Rubidge and Mike Day. And yeah, basically they show that abundance steadily increases across their extinction acme. And interestingly, this also, coincides with a period of low species richness, which I show here after the first vertical dotted line in this diagram on the right. We also potentially see a similar pattern of increasing abundance with the sauropodomorph Massospondylus across the inferred end-Triassic extinction event in South Africa's Upper Stormberg group. But unfortunately, studying the end-Triassic extinction event in South Africa is compounded by stark differences in fossil richness, between the Triassic portion of the lower Elliott and the Jurassic upper Elliott and Clarence formations. And I've shown this difference here with that chart on the left. This was something I was not used to when I started this work as a postdoc after my PhD and working in the Beaufort group. So, creating the needed fossil data to erect proper bin intervals to investigate this also requires more collecting with colleagues. We also do not see a rapid recovery. So as I mentioned before, high turnover and species richness fluctuations, in addition to this high Lystrosaurus abundance, likely represents destabilized communities similar to disaster faunas after other mass extinction events. So we think recovery probably only happened much later, possibly in the overlying assemblage zone like the Cynognathus zone or Middle Triassic. But to answer this question, we need to collect more data to confirm this theory. And these results also have importance to our current climate crisis. Many researchers like to compare the end-Permian extinction event to what is occurring with our global warming and that we are creating. And I think there is some truth to that, because what the end-Permian extinction tells us is that it really underscores the unsustainable nature of our current human activities. We have achieved similar climatic change and CO2 levels at the end of the Permian in the last 150 years that the end-Permian extinction took 1 million years to do. So, we as a species may not live to see ecosystems recover if we do not do something to stop it. So now I just wanted to end off my talk by briefly discussing some of my future research avenues that apply my bin interval approach to other research questions in the Karoo. one of these relates to the Karoo assemblage zones themselves. So the rich fossil record shows a lot of qualitative data that support the presence of these assemblage zone communities that change over time. However, you know, we're still not sure like what is an optimal optimal framework for these assemblages, yeah, so alongside collaborators that I'm working with at Umeå University in Sweden, we're basically trying to pioneer a network-based framework for the Karoo assemblage zones. So basically with network analysis, there are two primary aspects of the network, one being the node and the connection or the link. So as you can see in this figure currently in prep, I've used the same bin interval data from the PNAS paper to link tetrapod fossils stratigraphically in a node link framework. And I've also used the same bin interval data. Yeah, so we've also I'm also trying to create new bin interval data stratigraphically higher, but as I said before, we don't have as great data to work with there. So this is something I need to, you know, collect once I can go into the field again. And, you know, networks and changes to their connectedness over time can also be presented in an alluvial diagram like this one created using a flow-based clustering method in InfoMap. So here we looked at 5 different binning optimizations for the assemblage zones that show a best fit using different assemblage zone frameworks. So the different colors represent discrete assemblage zone communities, and you can see some do a better job at separating these communities from one another. And what is more useful for the Karoo assemblage zone framework is something we're still working on. Hopefully will be published on later this year. Interestingly, the meter level occurrence data also shows that sampling stratigraphic intervals of around 20 to 50 meters are sufficient to capture assemblage zone frameworks. So this new framework may be useful in helping Karoo workers collect data in future for the assemblage zones. So as I mentioned earlier, I am interested in collecting more stratigraphic data from the Cynognathus zone. As part of a grant I plan to submit to the National Science Foundation with Ken and Jelzik. So the Cynognathus zone covers vertebrate communities in the Burgersdorp Formation and is the youngest assemblage zone of the Beaufort group. And it's regarded to be Olenekian to Anisian in age and is divided into 3 subzones. The most common fossils in the Cynognathus zone represent Cynognathus, which spans all 3 subzones, and Canameria, which is only from 1 subzone. However, the traditional Middle Triassic age has been questioned by Carnian shrimp zircon dates for Cynognathus-bearing communities in South America. So it's possible that communities may not be early Middle Triassic in age. So the goal of this work would also be to provide radiometric dates to confirm this Middle Triassic age. But what is currently a mystery is the lack of early Archosaur and dinosaur form radiations in the Cynognathus zone. The only Archosaur radiations currently documented are represented by Archosaur forms, actually, shown here as Erythrosuchus, Gardenia, and Parkeria. So it's possible the Cynognathus zone may be older and support its current age estimates. But in other regions, such as in Zambia and Tanzania, there are also assemblages that have been correlated to the Cynognathus zone that show very different assemblages of communities. So here, for example, Cynognathus-bearing communities actually contain dinosauriform taxa like silosaurs. So what may be happening here is that these may actually be younger in age and what we are doing is actually mixing different aged communities together. So understanding what's going on in the Cynognathus zone will have positive implications for what is happening in the region globally, and also what is happening with Archosaur radiations after the end-Permian extinction event. So here it's just like a longer term goal diagram that basically just shows our hypotheses for correlations from the South African Cynognathus zone to other assemblages in Tanzania, Zambia, Zimbabwe, and Namibia, in comparison to the better dated South American assemblages of the Triassic. So this work I started on the Permo-Triassic boundary has, I feel, far-reaching research implications in the region of South Africa and beyond. And therefore, you know, I see my research goals being in the region for quite some time. So I hope that someday that means I'm conducting this research based in South Africa again. But for now, thank you very much for listening. And of course, there are many people to thank, but I just wanted to start by thanking my advisor, Ken and Jelzik, and the Field Museum for supporting me these past 2 years. And I also wanted to thank PAST, the NRF, and the Center of Excellence for supporting my career over the last 10 years. And thank you all for listening.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was really, really fascinating. Very, very interesting, and a great body of work, and still lots to do, which is really, really exciting.
Yes. Yes.
Very cool. So, leave
Should
your
I
slides.
stop? Okay, I can leave them up. Cool.
Leave your slides up there, and let's ask for some questions if you have a chance. So there's two ways you can ask questions to the audience out there. You can simply raise your hand by clicking on the hand button at the bottom of the screen that you'll see, or you can type a question into the Q&A box. It's really up to you. So if anyone has any questions, just raise your hand and I will unmute you. There we go. So I have Sue. I'm going to allow you to talk. And you just need to unmute.
Hi. Can you hear me?
You can.
Yes,
I can.
Okay, sorry, I'm on my phone. I wanted to ask, when you were grouping them into the different groups, do you see regional variations that are consistent that make sense?
Are you talking about within the Karoo? Like
within the Karoo,
variation?
or even the farther area? You were talking about a broader region towards the end.
Yeah, okay, so within the Karoo itself, across the Permo-Triassic boundary, we do seem to have a bias in the northern part of the sector to just have more data closer to the Permo-Triassic boundary, just because of the compressed nature of the section. I'm pretty certain that there's probably the lower part of the Daptocephalus zone may not even be exposed or deposited there. So, so there's that sort of bias. And then regionally, so this is we're still compiling, but yes, it seems that there are different communities that are being lumped together in work, particularly in the Triassic assemblages, where we're getting animals that seem to only appear in the Carnian being lumped with sort of these Anisian and Olenekian communities in the Cynognathus zone. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Sue. Bruce, I see your hand and I'm going to let you talk. You just need to unmute yourself.
Pia, can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Bruce.
Okay. Thanks, Pia. I think your talk was really exciting, and I think the work that you're doing is really exciting. Now, I found lots of things interesting, and I just wanted to know whether what I understand is correct. What you were suggesting is that the greatest rate of extinction, or the greatest amount of species going extinct, is somewhere between the traditional and the Gastaldo points. Is that right?
Yes. Yes, exactly. Although by the time you get to the Gastaldo point, the extinction's actually kind of over. You see like I can just get the diagram back again. sorry, just give me a sec. I don't know if you can see, Bruce, but yeah, if you, so, oops, sorry. Yeah, so the main peak is, I would say, below in the sort of upper Palinkloof. So this is pretty close to, you know, the traditional placement, I would say. You know, it's just, you know, the binning makes it a little tricky to see that. But by the time you get into the lower Katberg, I would say, you know, the extinction is over. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Well, that's very interesting, and I think that's a very nice result. Then you said that the recovery is possibly just in the Cynognathus zone. What exactly is recovery? Is recovery when a stable fauna starts appearing, or what is recovery?
Yeah, that's a good question. But what we can say from the data in the lower Katberg is it seems that there is just this period where, you know, you're getting these, and let me just move to, so this diagram is showing like fluctuations in like Lystrosaurus abundance. And that seems to coincide with these drops in species evenness, so like drops in like overall fin diversity. So it seems like communities are trying to recover and then they get destabilized again, and that seems to be connected to Lystrosaurus abundance, and then they try and recover again. And that, you know, we don't see what happens after that point, but, you know, we, I guess, regard the Cynognathus zone as recovered, just based on like, you know, just like a more stable community. I mean, they seem to have like new predators like the Archosaur forms and things like that appearing. But yeah, we're not sure how that actually happens.
Okay,
yes.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. And I like that last spiderweb diagram of yours. I don't understand it, but I look forward to seeing it in print later this year.
Thanks. Thanks, Bruce.
Okay, cheers.
All right, thanks for joining us, Bruce. Are there any other questions? All you need to do is to just click on the raise hand button and we can allow you to talk. But maybe while we wait for another hand to go up, Pia, perhaps I can ask a question which interested me towards the end of your talk. You spoke about how the end-Permian extinction showed climactic changes that equal, perhaps surpass, well, are similar to the climactic changes that humans have been causing for the last 150 years. What kind of data do we have from that extinction period that tells us that? Is it the carbon isotope excursions? Is it paleo temperature?
Yeah, so I guess I could have gone into more detail on that, but I wasn't sure how much time I had. But yes, it seems to be like generally reflecting the CO2 levels, so the greenhouse gas levels, and also the rates of species extinction. That's sort of what I was referring to.
Okay.
And yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's really fascinating. I think so. Obviously, the carbon isotope excursion that you showed at that point is one reflection of that.
Yeah, exactly.
All right. And then we have a question from Roger Smith. So, Roger, I'm going to allow you to talk, and you just have to unmute.
Thanks very much. Hi, Pia.
Hey, Roger.
Hey, very nice talk. Thank you very much. Pia, I would just like to ask you, I could have asked you privately, of course, but I would like to ask you what would the effect of halving the time interval of the bins and concentrating just on the extinction interval and also introducing the different species of Lystrosaurus into the data. Would you expect to find some more stepped extinction, if you like?
Yes, so I think that is possible, Roger. I think, in fact, some of the richness data does possibly support a stepped extinction. So yeah, I did not go into too much detail in the talk, but yeah, I agree that like at the current resolution, we may be missing that. So, and I think, yes, it's something we refer to in the paper as well, that like if we zoomed in on that, we might be able to identify some stepped parts of the extinction. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, last call for questions. I don't see any more hands going up. Okay, all right, yeah, I think you're off the hook there with questions. So just before everyone leaves, I'm just going to very quickly share my screen, just so I can advertise the talks for next week. So you should all be able to hopefully see my screen now. And so a talk we have next week by Robin Pickering and Jessica van der Meijden from UCT. It's all about ancient waterfalls, drill cores, and laser ablation, and of course moving to uranium thorium dating in a much younger environment in the Pleistocene of southern Kalahari. And that's going to be really interesting, but please note that the time is at 12:30. So not at 4:30, but at 12:30, and it will be broadcast on exactly the same webinar link. So please join us for that. And the week after that, we move on to a very different talk, but rates, conditions, and scales of mass transfer from the mantle to the crust, insights from Earth's youngest ultra-high pressure terrain. So that's back at the normal time of 4:30. Okay, so thank you, everyone. If you do want to stay behind, Pia has kindly volunteered to stay behind for some social networking, virtually, of course. But if you want to join us backstage, then all you have to do is raise your hand and I will promote you to a panelist and we'll all be able to have a nice interaction in a more casual setting. So thank you once again, Pia, and we'll see you all next week, same place, but a different time at 12:30.